Hello everyone and welcome to the live stream. This, in Spain anyway, sunny Wednesday morning. Hope you're having a great time, whatever time zone you're in. I hope it's going well for you. Hope the day's gone well for you, will go well for you, depending on when and where you are. And a very important matters first, absolutely critical. We follow on from where we were last week about the golf match between Nigel Mansell, James Hunt, Lee Trevino and Seve Ballesteros. Four icons, you got to say. And I've actually found now the picture of the four of them. There they are at what used to be the very pleasant Turnberry golf course. Not quite the same these days, won't go into that. And here is the famous Oscar, James Hunt's dog, that shared his Mercedes, 6-litre Mercedes, all the way up to Scotland. And was always there for James, looked after James. And as I say, you can see him panting there, Rin Tin Tin style. But whenever James began his backswing, as I say, he was trained to stop panting, and he was absolutely silent until James had hit the ball. Mega, eh? Anyway, I thought that absolutely vital that we got those in at the beginning of the live stream, because is there anything more important than that? Anyway, here we are. I was going to say in the wake of the Dutch Grand Prix. Already we're in the build-up to the Italian Grand Prix. Resurfaced last year, Monza, so it'll be a little bit more, a bit less conducive to graining, probably, I would say. And but mid-range Pirelli tyres, looking forward to it. Low downforce settings. DRS doesn't have quite as much effect, obviously, with low downforce. The wing isn't effective as it normally would be. And that's a good thing. Probably be more overtaking as a result, despite what everybody says. And looking forward to seeing how various drivers and cars and teams perform. I just hope that everyone's a bit nearer to McLaren, because as I said after Zandvoort, it is, I can't think of any other word but disgrace, really, when you think of the amount of money that the top teams generate and the facilities they have. And I'm not even going to go down the budget cap thing, because we all know that there are plenty of ways around that. And they still can't produce aero packages as good as that in the McLaren. It's pathetic, really. It really is. And I can't think of an era in which there have been more standardized key components on the car. Tires, basically engine, basically the chassis written for you in the rule book. And yet they can't get it right. It is unbelievable, really, to me. I'm absolutely, the more I think about it, the more astounded I am. Anyway, with no more ado, let's have a look at the questions and comments. Thank you very much, everybody who's queuing up. Equally, thank you very much for those that might be joining us fairly soon. First question is from Sarosh Soman, a regular. Hi, Sarosh. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Peter. Some of the changes I would make in Formula One. No DRS. Yep, go with that. Unlimited testing. Yep, go with that. No pit stops. Yep. No forced pit stops, anyway, I think is what you mean. More tyre manufacturers, 15 races a year, vehicle adjustments between qualifying and the race. Well, absolutely agree with every one of those. Of course, none of them will ever happen. Let's just go through them one by one as to why they won't happen. No DRS. Well, everybody's obsessed with overtaking ever since the dreaded fan surveys. Would you like to see more overtaking? Duh, answer yes. But nobody really understanding what that would entail. And DRS for me is artificial. It takes away the art of defense, and things can go wrong, as we've seen Marcus Ericsson, Jack doing very good examples. So get rid of DRS, but that'll never happen because everybody's too paranoid about there being less overtaking than there was the previous year. Stats, got to have all these numbers building up all the time. More overtaking, more exciting, more money. Yeah, okay. Unlimited testing, sadly, that's never going to happen, because as much as I'd love to see that in conjunction with far fewer races, it'll never happen because the teams make their money racing, not testing. They spend their money testing. So guess what? In this world of money, 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 and we've got to have more money, because then we'll have a much better aero package vis-a-vis Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. Yeah, right. The more money they throw at the car, the team, the less effective they seem to be these days. So anyway, they've got to have as much money as they can possibly have. So they've got to race as much as they can possibly race and not test at all, because it's expensive. Well, it's money out of the balance sheet as distinct from in. So that'll never happen. No pit stops. No, that'll never happen, because they think that if it's a really boring race, the one thing you can do, if you've got a battle between Lando and Oscar, they're separated by 5 seconds, but not much is happening, and nonetheless they're driving really well, and it's a race of strategy and a race of who can get the tires to do the best job. That's all too boring. Oh no, look, there's a Haas coming in for its third pit stop. We better go in and show that. That'll liven things up. They still have that mentality that a pit stop is more dramatic than anything else you'll ever see on the track. And to some extent, I think Formula One's a victim of its own excellence in that, because the speed of the pit stops is still something to behold. And I remember saying to Frank once that Frank Williams, when I was working with us, they should definitely reduce the number of people that can work on the car, because everybody does it in sort of 2 seconds or thereabouts now. What's the point? Blink and you miss it. Why don't we make the pit stops a bit longer, fewer people, more chance of things going wrong, and therefore more place changings? There's your overtaking. And Frank said, absolutely not. What's one of the hallmarks, the DNA of Formula One, are those unbelievable 2-second pit stops. We've got to have them on display all the time. And I suspect everybody involved in the decision-making process thinks the same way as that. I personally don't. I think Formula One pit stops should be fewer people and should take about 8 seconds. It'd be much better TV then, and much more chance of things going wrong, and much more of a unknown factor going into the race. Vehicle adjustments between qualifying the race. Yep, I agree with that as well. Obviously, you've got to find the fine line between making any illegal changes and making changes that allow the setup to be better for the race and what you've learned. And I guess that's the problem, isn't it? There's been so much cheating in the past in Formula One that today Formula One, the FIA, is absolutely focused on eliminating any form of cheating. And to do that, they've got to have a sort of blanket lowest common denominator, no changes to the car rule, and that's where we're at. But anyway, it's just lovely to read your ideas, even if they'll never happen. So Rosh, thank you very much for those. I don't want to be negative about it, but what else can you be? Another question from you. Peter, do you think it's a good move to get Isaac to Red Bull, given that Racing Bull is a good team and an easy car to drive? Just worried that he will find the Red Bull difficult to drive along with Max. Well, you say easy car to drive. I'm not sure Liam Lawson would agree with you there. It's only if you only look at Isaac, you could say, yeah, great car. But if you look at everybody else that's driven that car, you'd say, pretty average, sort of Williams standard car, isn't it? And yet here's a guy doing a really good job with short corners, developing that skill, that side of him. Very nice touch, lovely to watch, very patient on the throttle application. No, I think he should be in the Red Bull straight away. I think the reason that's probably not happening is because Honda probably paid a bit of extra money to have Tsunoda in the car when the option came up to do that. And so it's going to be a while before, that money is paid off, if you like. I don't know when, but it'd be 4 or 5 races before the end of the year. They'll have Isaac in the car, I think. But I think they probably this ongoing commitment to Honda on that one, and at the same time it's no bad thing for him to be at Racing Bulls because they're doing such a good job. Why not if nothing else, it's good for the team, isn't it, to have a really good driver there for guys like Jonathan Eddles and Alan and Alan Permain, giving them the confidence they need to go forward with what will undoubtedly be a lesser pairing in 2026. And so yeah, from that point of view of developing that team, it's good as well. And yeah, for sure, it is a better car. I would suspect that if Max, it's not just a question of jumping in the car, but if Max had sort of jumped into the Racing Bulls local pizza restaurant at the beginning of August and spent the month hanging out with them and getting to know everybody and getting to understand the way they ran the car and the way everybody thinks, I think he'd probably be super quick in that car. Yeah, not that much quicker than Hajab, but he would be, obviously, and it is a very good car. And it just bears out what I've always said, that good technology is more about people than it is about numbers and data. And what you're seeing at Racing Bulls are 2 good racers, Alan and Jonathan, I would say, and probably others there that I should give credit to, who have got the best from their technical people and got them to work harmoniously. And you may say, well, everybody knows what an aerodynamicist does, everybody knows what a wind tunnel technician does, everybody knows what a model maker does, everybody has their own little job. But of course, there are lots of grey areas in that, and some two people may not gel, and so you have to find a way of making that work, mix and match, and quite often some lower level engineering people are frustrated and want to be given more of an opportunity. And I think, doesn't that go back to the double diffuser BAR, that the actual the guy that actually realized that potential of the double diffuser he wasn't a high level aero guy. He was sort of middle range Japanese supplied by Honda aero guy who just thought it was a great idea. And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's getting the best from everybody, not just the star engineers and the star management team. And this applies particularly to the strategy teams, in my opinion. And there's not enough, in terms of the strategy of the teams, there's not enough leaning on good racing people who have a feel for racing, and there's too much leaning on, this is the strategy group, they will tell us what to do next. And Formula One has become far too departmentalized in that way. You could say compartmentalized, but I remember James Hunt once saying departmentalized. I thought, wow, that's a great word. Thank you, James. I'm going to use that. Okay, so Roche says, apologies, forgot to mention bring back the V8s. Yeah, well, you might want to throw in the V10s there as well. You know, it's incredible now to think how relatively cheap those engine packages were, how reliable they were, and how competitive the racing was, and how much everybody loved them anyway because of the sound. And yet we threw all of that away for the hybrids. Almost doubled the cost overnight, took away about 40% of the reliability, took away about 70% of the sound, and here we are, going even further down the same path. Oh, well, who am I? I'm not a cynic, no way. Richard Freeman, morning, Peter. Any memories of the last Formula One World Championship race at Brands Hatch in 86, I believe? Nelson Piquet pole, 1.9 seconds, Ayrton Senna in the Lotus, etc. Many thanks, Rich Freeman. Well, yeah, I have many, many memories from that race because it was the Shell Oil's British Grand Prix, won by the Mobil Oil Williams FW11 Honda. And it was a nail-biting race, actually. It was the first race in which Nigel had really taken it to Nelson. He'd been close, and there'd been lots of sort of semi-skirmishes, but this is the first one where they were wheel-to-wheel. And Nelson was thinking, what is this guy doing? And Nigel was just superb that day. My main memory, though, is of it being the first race that Frank Williams attended after his road accident in 86. And there was a big build up to that inside the team in terms of, could Frank make it? Would he make it? Would he be there? And he was there in the wheelchair and loving every millisecond of it. And I think Nelson, it was the week before, Nelson had just given Frank a nice present, which was a pad to have next to the phone with which he basically just bashed with his fist or his arm, and each number was quite big, and so he could start dialing his own phone number again that he wanted to ring, and that was a huge breakthrough for Frank, and very nice thought from Nelson. And more than anything else, I suppose, from my point of view, I mean, I was in the road car with Frank, and then I was in the hospital, I guess, average 2 days a week, every week thereafter the accident, right up until the British Grand Prix with Frank. Initially just being there with him, trying to help medically, and then beyond that there'd be the odd job that Frank needed done and thoughts about this and please tell Patrick that and anything else I need to look at. So it was a lot of that, and all that was to the background of a crisis about 2 weeks after we'd got Frank back to the UK, when they rang Ginny, his wife, from the London hospital, say, it's not looking good, Ginny, you need to come back to the hospital now. And she came back. I think it was quite early morning, sort of 3-4 in the morning. And they said, look, at this stage, we normally ask the wife, whether the nearest of kin, whether we should switch off the life support machine or not, because things are not getting any better for Frank. And she rang me, and I got up straight away and came to the hospital. By which time she said she'd spoken to Bernie, who had said to Ginny, and I mean, this is a third-party quote from Ginny, but she said to me, Bernie said to her, Frank wouldn't want to live this way. If I were you, I would have it all switched off. And I said, well, I disagree with that completely, Ginny. I think so long as he's got his brain and he can talk and he can think, he can run a Formula One team. And we should never do that. She said, that's exactly what I think, and we're never going to switch this off. Frank's a fighter. And that's where, and then you fast forward to July, the British Grand Prix. And I think everything that Ginny had said then, that was the moment when Frank could run a Formula One team again. Not sure Honda ever agreed with that, because they were completely shocked that Frank was there in a wheelchair and he therefore wouldn't be capable of running the team in the way he used to. That was the sort of the way they thought. But certainly from the point of view of the team, it was a major occasion. And yeah, you know, big shunts there, Jacques Lafitte, luckily okay. But Brands at that stage, very fast circuit, really. I mean, yeah, Druid's slow corner, but everything else was super quick. Not super quick, but around the back it was unbelievable. And you know, Nigel through Hawthorne, through Dingle Dell in an 11 Honda, just breathtaking. And I was watching a lot of that race, obviously from the pits, but then running around behind the pits and watching him going through South Bank. I don't know what it's called, Surtees maybe. And when they were close and wheel to wheel, I was absolutely, you know, clammy palmed, thinking, you know, what is going to happen here, you know, and yet it all went out okay, and it was just a great Grand Prix. I've still got the T-shirt. We won the Shell Oils British Grand Prix. Picture of Nigel in the Williams. So yeah, brilliant day. Thanks for asking me about that. Amazing. Volts. Hi Peter. I'm curious to know whether any of the short corner techniques would be something that works in a race simulator, whether it's something for gamers or Formula One sims. Well, in terms of the actual racing line and getting into an apex early and breaking into an apex, yeah, you can kind of simulate it. Of course, what you can't simulate are the dynamic forces from a number of different directions, multitude of different directions, which come into play when you are when you're generating lateral load against braking load, and you've got the problem of understeer and or flick oversteer. And those sorts of issues, as I've said many times, it's not a question of the line, it's a question of how you manage those dynamic weights. And if you don't have the subtlety and the suppleness and the softness of touch to be able to do that, you're going to end up with chronic understeer, or you're just going to be slow. You're going to be left foot braking and just slowing the car down too much. And that's the problem with sims, because sims there's no sim on the planet Earth, so far as I know, that accurately simulates all those dynamic weights. There are plenty of weights it can simulate, but all those weights happening together, no way. And so you'd be hard put really to simulate what a Max Verstappen is actually doing when he's creating a shorter corner. You couldn't do it on a simulator. Lots of other things you can do on a sim. I'm not knocking them. They're very good up to a certain point. But if you wanted to go that little extra bit, to me, it's all about being in a car and feeling it yourself and not trying to have some sort of simulation. Volts, another question. My other question, putting the totality of the sport aside, solely as a viewer, would you prefer to watch drivers in the same machinery so you can actually see who has the driving talent? You're the best. Yes, I mean, I talk a lot about the drivers because the drivers are incredibly important, as we see. You know, the difference between Hadjar and Lawson, which was clear at the start of the year, and the difference between Charles and Lewis. But I also love the cars, and Formula One is the only form of motorsport on the planet Earth in which, in order to even enter the championship, you have to design and build your own car and own its DNA, if you like. And I don't think Formula One does a very good job of telling the public that and showing the public the difference between a Ferrari and a Mercedes. We can see it in terms of colour, but how many fans, if they were all painted the same colour, would actually be able to tell the difference between them? Very few, I think. And that's the problem we have. But that's another issue, and that's not your question. So I wouldn't like to see them all in the same car. And I'll tell you one reason why. Because if you look at F2 or F3, it's impossible, really, to have identical cars. So you might as well go the route of, this is a Ferrari, this is a Merc, this is a McLaren. What I would love to see are the drivers jumping around during the course of the year and driving different cars. As I said before, to me, the absolute perfect Formula One has a sort of IPL cricket type auction before every race, let's say on the Thursday night, in which the teams bid for the drivers they're going to have that weekend, and you can't have the same driver for 2 consecutive races. I would love to see something like that. I'd love to see what it would be like if we got to Monza now and Oscar Piastri was in a Williams and Lando Norris was in a Red Bull and Max was in a Ferrari. You know, it would be great, wouldn't it? But I mean, that's what I'd love to see. And I once wrote a longish article for, I think it was the year 2000 edition of F1 Racing, when Matt Bishop was editor, and we all wrote these sort of fantasy feature articles. And mine was around having this auction before each race. I think I had Alex Wurtz in as the FIA president at the time, which would be no bad thing, of course. So yeah, I'd love to see that. But I think you can still tell quite a lot in driving talent, because at least we have 2 cars the same, and that's always very revealing, isn't it? And you can always look at that. The biggest problem are the TV camera angles. I'd love to see a much better use of the TV cameras to be able to tell the difference between one driver and another in the same team. We very rarely have decent camera angles. They're actually getting worse now because of the success of the F1 movie. I think F1 as a race production entity is now thinking, we've got to go the movie way, and we're getting more and more of those low down track shots, which mean absolutely nothing and tell you nothing at all. They could be doing 10 miles an hour or 10,000 miles an hour. You can't tell the difference. Super chat just come in from M.A. Khan. Thank you, M.A. Khan. Nice to have you aboard as ever. Always a big supporter of the show. I know you are. Peter, do you know how popular you have become with the F1 community? No, I don't. I try not to look at that. There are podcast forums dedicated to short corners and debates on driving because of your unique content. Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I doubt that's true, but anyway, if it is, all the credit should go to Rob Wilson, not to me. He coined the phrase short corners. I've kind of taken it a little bit further, I suppose, in the sense of applying it to what we're looking at on TV at the moment, whereas Rob is more focused on the next corner coming up at Bedford or Goodwood or wherever he happens to be. And so, yeah, thank you very much, Emma Gunn. Lovely you to say that. You didn't need to say that. Very kind of you. Philip Anderson, hi Peter. Pure hypothetical. If Visa RB wake up Feb 26 with clearly the fastest car, a la Braun, and Red Bull like 5th, do you see a possibility where Helmut puts Max in the car during the season? Absolutely. I mean, difficult to believe that would happen because they've both got the same power unit, haven't they? It would be the Ford power unit, developed by Red Bull powertrains, obviously, or in conjunction with. So for Visa RB to be the fastest car and Red Bull to be only 5th fastest, well, it could happen, couldn't it? I mean, look at the mess they're making of the aero at the moment at Red Bull. I know he finished 2nd in the Dutch Grand Prix, but at the end of the day, he was 3/4 of a second a lap slower than the McLarens around Zandvoort, a very short lap. And on soft tyres, he was eaten alive by the McLarens on the hard tyres at the end. I mean, it was just embarrassing. And of course, if you had that B team, why wouldn't you do that? You know, just move everything across. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because Laurent Mekies, I guess his mates or and a lot of people around say, oh, well, you should take a lot of the credit for the way Racing Bulls are going now because you set that whole thing up. But the problem with that is, the corollary of that is, now let's do the same thing at Red Bull, you know. Not so easy, I think. Not so easy. The equivalent is to make the Red Bull a second lap quicker than a Racing Bulls. That's what he's got to do now. Because that's where they should be. That's where they should be in terms of budget, experience, people, knowledge, drivers. Well, one driver. Aaron Lee. Hello, Aaron, another of our regulars. Hi, Peter. When you watch races, do you choose the camera angle or leave it on the world feed? If you could choose, what would you focus on? Cars that are close, short corners, mix, etc. Well, I mean, you can choose any onboard you like. So, but I mean, Zandvoort, I didn't really go to any of the onboards because there was nothing to be gained by doing that. There are certain circuits and certain situations in which you say, oh, I need to be with this guy right now, see what he's going to do here. Equally, you go to the world feed, but if it is getting boring and they're showing too much of some absurd midfield bunch just because they happen to be covered by 0.3 of a second, you can go to, that might be a moment when you might want to go on board with Charles Leclerc and to see what he's up to and how he's driving. So you have to look at the onboards and see what camera angles they're using as well, because I know they switch them around, but on some of them they tend to use the low down camera far too much. Others, they tend to have the nice camera just by the driver's shoulder most of the time, and that kind of defines really the choice for me. I would never go with the low down onboard thing. It's ridiculous. Even the rear shot is crazy. I think I just want to, if you're gonna have an onboard, just want to see what the guy's doing. You want to see the steering wheel, you want to see the front wheels, you want to see the track ahead, and have the audio for that. And when I'm watching the world feed, I always go to the what do they call it, the FX audio, which is the ambient audio, so I can always hear the engines as best you can. Not always in sync, but it's pretty good. Monza Edits is your name. Wow, what a name to have. I wonder if you change it every race. Good day, Peter. Do you think Hamilton should hang his helmet and call it a day in Formula One? Wow, poor old Lewis. I do really, yeah, I do. As much as I've always admired Lewis as a driver, ever since Formula 3, I just don't see, well, I never could see the point of him going to Ferrari. I totally get that from his point of view, it made a lot of sense. Obviously, breath of fresh air, nice team, wasn't going anywhere at Mercedes, a lot more money, whatever, for pretty good reasons there. I don't decry his decision to do it because he was offered that situation. But I never saw the point of it from Ferrari's perspective. And I don't see the point of it now. They could have Oliver Behrman in that car. They could have, they could have Carlos Sainz in the car again. They could have any number of drivers who would probably be doing a better job than Lewis now. And I say that, it's people, oh, Carlos Sainz versus Lewis. I mean, Carlos Sainz was taking it to Charles Leclerc and beating Leclerc on occasions and winning races, So it's not a bad thing to say. It's a logical thing to say. And the same goes with Behrman. I mean, if you're going to look to the future, Oliver's doing an incredibly good job. And he deserves, I think, a chance at Ferrari now, a proper chance. And I don't know what Lewis is, as I said before, if the Ferrari, I said this the minute he announced that he was going to Ferrari, that if the Ferrari is a championship winning car, a really good car, Lewis's biggest problem is how to beat Charles Leclerc. And if it's not, why does he want to be there anyway? So where was the upside in going there, apart from those four things that I mentioned? From his point of view, it made sense, I suppose, bank balance, etc. But to me, I don't know I don't know what progress he thinks he's going to make. Yeah, he might out-qualify Charles a couple of times before the end of the year. He might out-race him a few times. But so what? If to justify being the Lewis Hamilton that can shift a share price of a company like Ferrari, you need to be going in and being a superstar and upstaging Charles Leclerc, not just matching him 50% or less of the time. You got to be, out there justifying your existence. And at the moment, I can't imagine he's enjoying his racing, and that's the biggest problem. He's always enjoyed his racing. He's a race driver, and I just don't think he's enjoying it. And that kind of showed through with that shunt he had at Zandvoort, didn't it? That was a very uncharacteristic shunt again. It was just like lack of concentration, which we very rarely see from Lewis. And it's sad to see. Monza Edits. Oh, jump, sorry. Go back to Monza Edits. Here we go. Good day again, Peter. What is your take on the active arrow that'll be replacing DRS? Well, it's only replacing DRS in the sense that DRS has fixed positions on the track where you can operate it. if you're within half a second of the car in the zone. But it's still basically DRS. It's just front and rear now, and that's, to me, that's a big issue, and it's not going to be completely up to the driver and the team, but to me there's a huge propensity there for something to go wrong, to have the thing open when it shouldn't be, or some drivers can get it open and get away with it in a McLaren, for example, and others can't. And it all comes under the heading of artificial aids anyway. And I think when we had the big wings on stalks in back end of 68 going into 69, at that point when Graham Hill, South African Grand Prix, has a rear strut collapse, and then you have Jackie Oliver has the same thing at the French Grand Prix, and Jochen Rindt in the Spanish Grand Prix, Graham Hill in the Spanish Grand Prix, and all these wings are collapsing. I think Formula One took the right decision suddenly to say ban them overnight, and we went into the second practice session at Monaco 69 with no adjustable high wing aerofoils allowed. And now we're going back to adjustable, not high wing, but adjustable aerofoils. And I think it's a backward step myself in terms of safety. And I don't think it's a necessary step in terms of Formula One and what it is as a sport. So I'm dead against it, to be honest. I'm dead against push to pass as well. I think it's so artificial. It's just terrible. Next thing they'll be doing is weight penalties or something on the cars. I can't stand. I hate to say, I don't want to keep using this word hate and can't stand, but I find it absolutely irritating beyond description that we have these artificial restrictions on racing in Formula One. This is Formula One. It's not Formula 3. It's not touring cars. It's not NASCAR. It's Formula One, and it should be pure racing. Oh boy, Leo. Hi, Peter. The tire temperature and the window is really important for the cars to be able to push. Anything Pirelli could do to make this not such an important factor? Well, it's always been a huge factor. Always been a huge factor. If you think back to 68 US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, Mario Andretti put the Lotus on the pole. It was his first ever Grand Prix. He'd practiced for the Italian Grand Prix but wasn't allowed to race. So this was his first big race, the US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen. And he put it on the pole in a factory Lotus 49, third car. And everybody at the time said, oh, well, Mario, knows the Glen, Watkins Glen, American local hero, blah, blah, blah. Mario had never been to the Glen before. Very, very few people realize that. He'd never been to that track before. What he had done is a massive amount of testing for Firestone in USAC, in road courses for USAC. And he began with that testing. He twigged with a certain compound Firestone tire that the longer you ran it, the better it became. It came into the temperature window, the tread, everything just perfectly synced out. And that's what he did. He stayed out on track and just went quicker and quicker, whereas Graham Hill and Jack Oliver and the two other factory Lotuses were coming in new sets of tyres, usual thing, and couldn't get near Mario. Now, I make that point because how you use the tyres and how you generate tyre temperature and the operating window that you have, been around since long before that even, but that's 68 as a marker. So your next question is, should Pirelli be doing things differently in order to make it easier to have a temperature window? Well, bear in mind they're in a monopoly, so they have zero pressure, excuse the pun, to do anything innovative or super technical at all. Their main priority is no tire failures. That's their first priority. Second priority, a tire that's more or less commensurate with the requirements of the track. Sorry, let's go back to zero then. The zero one is taking into account the known forces of a Formula One car, designing tyres that will not fail under those extreme forces. Then it's tailoring compounds to that carcass for the various circuits that are going to be on the calendar. And there are a lot of tracks, so that's a lot of work from Pirelli's point of view, much more than it would have been in the days of only 10, 13, 15, 18 races. And then it's responding to Formula One's requirements for the racing to be close. And number one, that's lots of pit stops, lots of place changes, pit stops. Leader comes in, loses the lead, pit stop, 2-stop, 3-stop strategy. Got to be better than a 1-stop strategy. That's a general belief. I don't necessarily go along with that, but I mentioned that at the start of the show. And then beyond that, having tyres that kind of work the way they should in terms of when you can get the temperature up and how they fall off the cliff, and graining and blistering and lack of thereof. So for Pirelli to do that, what you just suggested, to come up with a tyre which has a bigger sweet spot, a bigger window of operation, how would they do that? The problem is McLaren would say, well, we're quite happy with the tyres, actually. Our sweet spot's perfect. Our drivers know exactly how to get it up to temperature, and we always find it. So Pirelli would then say, well, McLaren don't have any problem, Mr. Ferrari. So what is it you want us to do? Oh, well, you know, for our car it's different. We need to, not supposed to do the accent. Although some people say we can. I'm going to do it. We need a bigger, sweeter spot. And Pirelli say, well, I'm not going to do that because that will then ruin it for McLaren. Why would we do that? And that's the end of the story, really. If one team's got it right, you can't change anything. More fool all the others who haven't got it right. We would all love to see all the teams having much better tyre temperature control, because we think it would lead to much more competitive racing, that the Mercs, the Ferraris, the Red Bulls would be a lot nearer than McLarens. But that's not going to happen because McLaren are doing a great job with the tyres. So why would they countenance that? And why would Pirelli want to spend any money anyway when they've got a tyre that works on a McLaren? You know, they've got it. So they don't need to spend that development money. And it is a lot of it's about money, of course. AL, hi Peter. With good straight line speed and lower drag than the McLaren, and the only one to take a new engine this weekend, is there a chance for Max to win at Monza? Well, a lot of the straight line speed Red Bull have is because they don't have the downforce of McLaren. That's the first point to remember. But yes, you're right. I mean, obviously that'll become evened out on a circuit where there's less peripheral downforce from the front and rear wings. Lower drag than the McLaren, only again because they have less downforce. So McLaren, you know, in a low downforce setup, which they will for sure have been working on since Canada, it'll be interesting to see how slow indeed they are really in a straight line at Monza. And don't forget that a lot of the top speed you're going to carry into the main straight past the pits is defined by what you're doing through the parabolica. And absolutely for sure, Lando and Oscar are going to be quantifiably quicker than Max Verstappen through parabolica, no doubt about it whatsoever. So by the time Max has, if you like, made up for the loss of speed he's got coming out of the parabolica, you're probably at the start-finish line, and then you got that section from the start-finish line down to turn 1. Yeah, McLaren can live with that. I know DRS isn't going to be that effective, but they will have, if they need it, DRS. And so I don't think McLaren are going to be super slow at Monza. I think it might be a bit better for Max in the Red Bull. It might be. But he's going to have a big compromise between getting the car nice through the Lesmos, through Ascari, through Parabolica, and having some sort of top speed advantage that might help him over the lap. That's going to be really difficult for him, I think. Be fascinating to see that. He'll be the most interesting guy to watch in that respect, I think. Leonardo Puppets. Hello, Peter. Hi there. Detro. Nothing there. Flora. Hi, Peter. Greetings from Hungary. Hello there. Yeah, lovely country. Have you given any thought to live commentating at races as discussed before the summer break? Well, you mean these watch-alongs? Well, I have actually. And I don't know how to phrase this, but I did actually contact F1 about it, and they immediately replied, it is completely illegal and breaching all of our TV rights we have with all our companies if you do a watch along. Now my response is, well, everybody else is doing it, to which I got no response. And so at the moment I'm nervous about it because, and it's probably because I've been around so long and I know all the people at Formula One, or most of them, on the TV side, and I don't want to do the wrong thing. And obviously my head's above the parapet in terms of somebody they know. They may not know a lot of the other YouTube channel people out there, but they certainly know me. And if I start doing something which they've told me is in total breach of rights regulations, then that's not a good thing. So I'm not going to do it at the moment because I've been told it's illegal to do it. And there you go. And I kind of understand it. I mean, if BBC Radio, and I don't know if this is for a fact, but I'm just using an example. But if BBC Radio are paying F1 a certain amount of money to have the rights to do live broadcasts from the race, why would they countenance people doing live broadcasts from their studio without paying any money? It kind of, it's a good point. And I had thought of that before I contacted them. Of course, I knew that would be an issue. So all I would say is, everybody out there who is going to do a watch along, be careful. Not from me. I'm just saying that my feeling is not to do it because it is illegal. But if people want to go and do their own thing, that's their deal. Ashish Jane, Peter, any difference in skill set between wet and mixed conditions? Any drivers you can think of who are brilliant in one and hopeless in the other? No, I can't really. I think if you're good in the wet, you're always going to be good in semi-wet, dry on line, dry on racing line, wet off it, wet curbs. You're always going to find the grip and you're going to drive very well like that. I first experienced what it was like to be super quick in the wet with Carlos Reutemann in a Fiat 131 Abarth around Brands Hatch, actually. And it was exactly those conditions. It was there was a dry groove, but it was wet everywhere, basically, apart from the dry groove. And Carlos was going into paddock, and he was just around the outside of paddock the whole way, looking for the grip. He wasn't on the dry bit where it was quite oily and greasy. He was just on the edge of that. And that's where he felt the grip was at its maximum, because there's a little bit of marbles that were giving him traction. And I was thinking about it afterwards. And of course, what he was doing was braking to that point. He wasn't even looking at the normal corner. He was looking at his corner suddenly was only about half a car length wide. But that was what he was braking to and turning into. And that's a great skill. It's a great skill to know the part of the track that has the most grip. Most drivers, great drivers like Max, for example, Lewis, can feel that even when they're going very slowly. And they can see it and they can feel it. And the minute they can see it and feel it, they can then go very quickly around that specific part of the road which has the most grip. So when you say mixed conditions, you're really talking about where there's very big variation in grip levels on various parts of the track surface. And it isn't necessarily always the dry part. And there's another factor, of course, that you want to keep the tires as cool as possible. That's usually done on the straight, but if you're on a long corner with a lot of load, you may not want to do that. But generally speaking, it's not always the dry line that is the quickest. Sometimes it's the edge of the dry line. And that's where the great skill comes in. As for the wet, it's a similar thing. It's not a similar thing. It's less. I mean, you obviously have to feel where the grip is, and that's a point. But in the wet, it rewards drivers with very, very soft touches and very soft feel for what they're doing, and that's absolutely been the same from the age dot. Pedro Rodriguez, very good example. Very soft touch, Pedro. Jean-Pierre Beltoise, another. Naturally so because of his arm injuries, but very soft touch in the wet. No surprise he won Monaco 72 the way he did. And so, yeah, it's fascinating, the wet. It's such a shame we don't have more wet weather racing in Formula One now. Tim Hunter, Muttley 8303, good evening from Melbourne. G'day, mate. Just watching I don't know if it's because I watched one or two, there's a whole lot there. I was watching on YouTube yesterday, 58 Australian, wasn't the Australian Grand Prix, it was the Albert Park International, I think it was called. Brilliant. Sterling Moss in the Rob Walker Cooper, Stan Jones in a 250F, Doug Whiteford, really, really good coverage, colour, Albert Park, amazing. I hope Melbourne's in good shape and looking forward to the Grand Prix next year. Raymond Daiso. Hi, Peter from Australia. Is it the mechanical grip that the orange team has better than other teams out of corners? No. It's all aero. It's all aero. Anything you see today that's along the lines of this is really good is aero. And you can do a lot with not a lot. You've got a certain amount of compliance you can play with suspension. If they want to go, if they want a little bit more traction, they can go a little bit softer at the rear, or they can go stiffer at the front. Things like that, they're always there to play with. Tire pressures a little bit, ride heights more than anything else, I suppose. But it is ultimately about downforce, and it's about, if you've got a certain level of downforce, that's going to give you turn-in and traction and a balance around which you can race. Now, if that also turns out to be at a much higher level than the downforce that Ferrari have when they have their balance and their traction and their turn-in, Bob's your uncle. Suddenly it looks like your car's got great traction. In reality, you're just operating, everything's operating at a higher level because you've got more efficient downforce for the same, effectively, same amount of wing. McLaren, again, relatively slow in Zandvoort in a straight line, but didn't hurt them at all because they're so quick out of corners. And it is an aero thing. So yeah, if it was a mechanical suspension thing, by now most of the other teams would have sorted it and got it right. But because it's aero, it's so subtle and so difficult, obviously, because nobody seems to be able to get it right, that it's taking forever. And it probably will never happen. Probably no one will ever find the solution to beating McLaren before the end of the year. Tobacco Road, 5:06 a.m. here in the People's Republic of Massachusetts. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. We need to talk a little bit about the ridiculous saves by Max Verstappen, LTP tent OL. Yeah. And then, of course, the other one was that, I mean, obviously the Barcelona one on the mediums at the restart, and he runs wide and boom, he just holds it perfectly. And he's super. But then what I forgot to mention was sort of 100 meters after that, there's Charles Leclerc driving into him at 8th gear on the straight. And he doesn't, and there's no problem at all. No, it could be the way they just touched and there was never going to be a moment. But, you know, it's pretty cool when somebody in a Ferrari can just run into you at 8th gear and you just keep it absolutely on the straight and narrow as Max did. Anyway, then fast forward to Zandvoort, and with plenty of others in between, smaller ones, but Zandvoort, that moment on turn one, coming out of one into two. You see, the other point is, I said to Cameron, I don't think there are any other drivers on the grid, maybe Charles, who could have saved that car the way Max did there, with no grip. I mean, basically it was just sliding on sand, boom, like that. But of course the other point is, and here I probably would put Charles in there, I don't think there are any other, apart from those two, who would actually have stayed there anyway and tried to get that position from Lando. I think everybody else would have said, I lost this, it's Lando's thing. Everybody else would have backed off, everybody else. But not Max, and I don't think Charles would have either. And it wasn't only that he kept it on the island, fingertippy, but it was then, within a millisecond, he was thinking, and I'm still going to get Mac. I'm still going to get Lando. Break, it's straight line here, I got him. Yeah, he wasn't even thinking about the moment. He was just thinking, I'm going to get Lando. Just brilliant to watch. Made it. Tobacco Road said, it's now 5:07. Mega. Good. Lol says, he makes it look like it's impossible. It's possible, but we don't see others doing it in such situations. No, of course not, because they couldn't do it. I say most of them would have lost the lot at that point, and there would have been a multi-car shunt going into Hunzerug, but there wasn't, because it was Max. Having said all of that, another point. If he hadn't tried to go around the outside of Oscar, having made a good start on his soft tyres, and thus obliged Oscar to go wide to stop him, and thus giving Lando the chance to come down the inside, and that's why they get into that position in turn two. If Max had read Oscar differently, which was, no way I can get him here, I'm just going to sit right on his tail, of course he would have been clear of Lando and gone through. And I wonder whether he might have been able to put a bit more pressure on Oscar on that opening lap. Not that it would have amounted to much. Even if he'd got him, Oscar would have breezed past within a lap or two for sure. But I suppose from Max's point of view, he felt he was on the soft tyre and I got to go for it. And there's finally another point. How many drivers, when they go for something like the soft tyre, knowing that everybody else is on the medium, And then immediately that does put pressure on you. You got to deliver. I mean, the whole point of the soft tyre is the first 3 corners of the race. You got to make a great start, and you got to do well and pass cars in the first couple of corners. How many times do we see drivers going on the soft tyre and doing nothing with it? They either make a poor start, or they get bogged down in traffic, or this happens. Max maximised the soft tyre as well. Admittedly, he was at the front, and quite often that choice is made from midfield when somebody's qualified out of position and they think, oh, I'll make up a few positions coming into the first corner off the line, and then they get bogged into all the fracas of the traffic. So it's not a true comparison, but nonetheless, when the pressure's on and you got to deliver, it's interesting to see Max sort of looking half asleep on the grid, totally relaxed, pulse rate 63, and then just boom, doing it. Wonderful. It's not to detract from the 2 McLaren drivers, certainly Oscar. I mean, talk about dead cool as well. Had that race won from the millisecond the lights went out. Lancelot Jonathan. Hey, Peter from Nigeria. I've started watching the World Rally Championship because of you, and it's been very exciting. Well, that's good to know. Thank you very much. Try to impart my love of rallying into the show whenever I can. I was a bit bemused by the events of Paraguay, I got to say. I mean, brilliant drive by Sébastien Ogier. Had a puncture, looked to be out of it on the first day, and then wins the rally. But a lot of issues, certainly at Hyundai, damper failures and other things, and tyre laminations, very odd, and lots going on at Toyota as well. But it's all bringing up into quite an interesting climax to the championship now. And next weekend, not this weekend, but next following weekend, of course, we have the Rally of Chile. So again, in South America, and could be foggy and cloudy in Chile. So I'm really looking forward to that one as well. Brian Murphy. Hi, Peter. Love your show. Thank you very much, Brian. Very kind. What characteristics made Senna different from all other drivers? Your thought on Adrian Newey? Your thought on Adrian Newey's part in his death? Wow, that's a bit of a heavy question. Thank you. Ayrton different from all other drivers? Well, I've got to think about this one. I mean, every driver is different. I know it's a cliche, and that's not the answer you want to hear from me. I don't subscribe to him being the best driver of his era. I think Prost was better than Senna in a couple of areas, not as good in some. I think Nigel Mansell was better in areas, not quite as good in some others. All three had their characteristics and their style of in and out of the car. So I can't really say what made Ayrton different. All I can say is the way Ayrton was. And he was, I'd like to say super competitive, but then so were Nigel, so was Nigel, so was Nelson Piquet, so was Alain Prost. I mean, I'm thinking of that time when we were getting the road cars at Brussels airport, and Ayrton and I both ended up with Alfa Suds, and we were both sort of accelerating onto the motorway together. And it was so annoying because he was accelerating quicker than I was, and I was flat out in every gear trying to do my Gilles Villeneuve gear changing, and he still beat me in a straight line. But then Nigel would have too, so that doesn't really add up to much, I don't think. Attention to detail, as I said in the video from Zandvoort, you know, that picture I showed of him, I don't know if you saw it, but there he is at Thruxton, virtually empty pit lane, watching a minor support race with a friend of mine, Paul Taft, who became a friend of Ayrton's because Paul was a very quick Mini driver at the time, Metro driver. And he was there watching the start procedure as well as Ayrton. And Ayrton was quite impressed by that. And Paul was sort of telling Ayrton what had been going on at other races with the start procedure. And so that sort of attention to detail, but that's no different really, again, from Prost, Nigel, Piquet. They're all into that sort of detail. I just think he was different, but then Nigel was different. Prost was different. I can't say any more than that. He had a good sense of humor. He loved his model aircraft, found that very relaxing, but also found it a very good background to his work in the cockpit and good for his coordination. Everything had to be in sync with Senna. I remember when he was, and this is sort of a little bit the answer to the next question, the second part of your question, when the Williams was announced at Estoril, I think it was, for the first time in Rothman's colours with Ayrton as the driver, and they pulled away the blue cover sheet, Ayrton was climbed into the car, and you can just see him moving around, trying to get a comfortable position in the cockpit. And I think that kind of summed up Ayrton's relationship with that car. I don't think he was ever 100% comfortable in that car from a point of view of his back and his thighs and his arms and his elbows. And don't forget, he was a driver that had, and this perhaps was a differentiation, that had his share of muscle and nerve issues, and he'd been paralyzed down one side of his face. I think it was the back end of '86, testing at Ricard. And then in Brazil in '94, he had that weird spin, very unlike Ayrton. I always think he probably had some sort of cramp at that point. And so he was very sensitive to all of that. And people always say Nigel put on a bit of a show after the race, you know, showing how shattered he was or how tired he was. I mean, I remember going up to the podium in Imola when we won there, and Ayrton was third, and he was just sitting in the corner of the green room, just head in hands, couldn't move, could not move, in agony, really. Every muscle in his body was hurting. So as for Adrian, I'd rather not go there. I think plenty of engineers over the years in Formula One can look into their soul, look into the mirror and say, yeah, you know, that thing I did has caused that accident. I don't think that's the case with Adrian. I don't think he had, I think there was a slight mistake in the way they had the rear of the car set up aerodynamically, and it wasn't as good as it could have been. But I mean, that's normal racing stuff, and there's no way any blame should be put on Adrian or Patrick Head there. And if you're going in the area of the steering column, in my opinion, there was no steering column failure at all. It was all to do with tire pressures, tire temperatures, ride height, absurd use of a hopeless safety car, too many laps behind the safety car, and the safety car should never have been deployed in the first place. They should have stopped the race, cleared the track after that start line accident, and done a restart. And they didn't, because the powers that be, mainly Bernie, was so keen to have a safety car in Formula One at that point, even though it was a hopeless safety car. Actually, I was watching what was I watching? I was watching an Indy 500 replay yesterday, and it was 64 from memory. No, it was 60, what year was it? Anyway, what they did was increase the safety car speed. I think it was 73, actually. I think it was 73, the terrible year. They started the race very briefly on the Monday before the rain, and then they had to restart it again on Wednesday. But before they stopped it on the Monday, there was that big shunt with Saltwater when he kind of lost it, and, well, did lose it, completely sideways and went off on the right into the debris fence, and spectators were seriously injured with the fuel out of the car, and it's a massive shunt. And it was deemed, one of the reasons that they thought that accident happened is because the pace car was only doing 80 miles an hour, and there was too much of an acceleration. Once the pace car went in, everybody had to accelerate hard, and that's why he lost it. And so for the rerun of the race on the Wednesday, they increased it to 100. Interestingly, the driver was Jim Rathman, funnily enough, one of my heroes, former winner of the Indy 500, the race of two worlds, and the guy with the Chevy dealership in Florida that used to give the Corvettes to all the NASA astronauts. And Jim Rathman was driving the safety car, pace car, as it was known in America, is known. And he took it up to 100 miles an hour, and it was a relatively clean start. And he was only doing what he was told to do, of course. So it's interesting that Americans had to work on making the pace car as well, to make it work as well. And here we were at Imola in '94, no idea what we were doing with a pace car, safety car, and going around in basically a road car with, couldn't even do half a lap before the brakes and tires had gone. And Bernie wanted it. And that was the cause of the accident, in my opinion. Chakilla, hit the like button. Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind. Lol, they're also removing the fun a little bit. Yeah, well, absolutely. Closer to NASCAR pit stop times. Yeah, well, I agree. If it's a bit of I don't like to see mechanics having to throw these huge 18-inch tires around, wheels around. But at the end of the day, if we did have fewer in the pit lane, certainly it would be safer at circuits like Monaco for a start. And we saw there was a front jack problem on Lando's car at Zandvoort, wasn't there? There's a lot going on in these pit stops. I would much rather see fewer people, longer times, more chance of slight thing going wrong, and more changes going on. Maxter Ace, Bruce McLaren was from New Zealand. Why do they play the English anthem when they win? That's a question to give to Liberty, not to me. I don't know. I mean, did you see the whole thing? I'm sure they play the British one for the constructor because it's a British company. And McLaren, well, I say British, it's probably Bahraini more than anything else, isn't it? But anyway, there's the driver and the constructor's thing, isn't it? So yeah, so Oscar would have got the Australian anthem, and then McLaren is not a New Zealand company, I don't think, is it? I think that's the problem. Tire Smoke, hi Peter, weird question. How do you attend a rally race? Do you attend all stages? Is there stands or just stand when the cars pass by? Can't find any info. Yeah, well, less said the better, really. No, what you do is you have to treat it as a sort of semi-holiday of, I'm going to go and see this country. And you have to pick and choose your stages. And it kind of depends on the rally. If it's Monte Carlo, there are so many people, and so many people get there the night before and just stay there all night camping, that trying to get to that stage, Col de Torini, good example, forget it. But there are other stages where people aren't going to necessarily clamour in. And sometimes you have to walk for sort of 10, 15 minutes through the woods to get to a point where you can see from the book that it's going to be quite good there. There's a jump there, there's a left, right, whatever. And usually that works quite well. I have to confess, I'm very lucky because I've got the world's greatest map reader, Jack Windsor, usually next to me navigating. And he's always very good at, everybody's queuing up here, looks like we got to join the queue. And he says, no, go down this side road here. And we go down the side road, and 5 minutes later we're in a different part of the stage altogether. And so it's not that easy. I mean, generally speaking, with the World Rally Championship event, as distinct from, say, European Rally Championship, the most number of stages you'd be able to do in a day would be 3. So enjoy it. Take your esky with you, have your sandwiches, have a drink, enjoy the atmosphere, the people around. And that is part of the thrill of rallying, because there's that build-up, and then the whistles start blowing, and then the course cars come through. And then you hear this note. It's a little bit like watching the old German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. There's this note you hear rising and falling, and then you see a bit of a dust cloud, and then suddenly, Elfyn Evans appears in midair in the Toyota, landing sideways, and everybody goes ballistic, and it's pretty cool. I love it. And then you go back to headquarters as well. It's always good there. And around headquarters, they always have the opening stage. This is usually Thursday night, and the final stage, the Wolf Power Stage thing, on Sunday afternoon or Sunday lunchtime. They're usually relatively near rally headquarters and usually pretty spectator friendly. So you get to those and you usually see a lot. But in the rally headquarters, you get to see them all as well. And you see a lot of good bits of driving. I was watching, where was Sardinia, I think it was. And they drive, not like Formula One, where they come into the pits and they go that way, and then they back them, the mechanics push them back into the garage. In rallying, they just drive nose first into the tented area. And I was watching, I think it was Tanak. He was going back out after the service thing, and he's reversing now, right? And there's the Hyundai Motorsport Transporter is like here, and he's here, and there's a very narrow thing, probably 6 inches either side, and he basically just goes boom, like that in reverse. I think, whoa, that's better than watching a stage, actually. Little things like that. And then there's the other thrill when you see them on the road. You're driving you're on a road section between one stage and another, and all of a sudden, oh look, there's Katsuda in front of us, 3 in front of us in his Toyota RS, rally GR. And that's wonderful, following them on the road, because they all have to do the speed limit in theory. So you're following them, and you can hear the engine note, bah, and then periodically they get very frustrated with somebody in front. They go, bah, and they just disappear into the distance. Love it. The kid in all of us. Lol. Isaac is what Toto hoped Kimi would be, I guess. he will get better, but so far he's had 2 famous crashes already. Max and Charles. Yeah, well, yeah, it's difficult to see Kimi ever being as good as Isaac Hadjar, in my opinion. I think Isaac's better on fast corners for sure. Kimi's not bad, but I mean, he has got everything going for him, hasn't he? He's got a great Grand Prix car. Everybody loves him. Toto loves him. Give him lots of latitude. George loves him, and he's learning lots. So why wouldn't he be going quite well? You could almost say, you know, is he better than Jochen Mass or Jack Lewis? 2 names you thought I'd never mention just like that. 2 names that suddenly sprung to mind, only because I was watching the 62 French Grand Prix video the other day, and there's Jack Lewis finishing 4th or something. Very good. Anyway, or was it Monza? One of them. Anyway, finished very well. And he's privately entered Cooper. So, yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a discussion with Cameron about Toto's role as both a driver manager and a team principal. And I think it's totally okay myself. And I'm going to tell you a story now, which by no means is me saying I knew it would be this way and I knew how it would turn out and I predicted it would. It's just me explaining how things happen in motor racing. When IMG were managing Jackie Stewart, they were breaking new ground in Formula One. They had a Formula One driver, as distinct from a golfer or a tennis player or whatever. And Jackie did very well with IMG. And he was uniquely managed by IMG. And they did a lot for his brand, Rolex, Goodyear, the whole thing. And then later on, IMG tried to come in again with Michael and some other drivers and manage 4 or 5 of them. And I remember, and I set up, I knew the guys at IMG quite well, and I set up a meeting with Ian Todd, who was running IMG UK at the time, and went to see him. And I said, Ian, this is my pitch. I said, Ian, you'll see where I'm coming from in a second. I said, Ian, what you're doing with drivers is never going to work because they all have different priorities, different stages of their careers, and they all need a racing car in which to drive, as distinct from holding a tennis racket or kicking a football. They've got to be with a team. They've got to be in a racing car. And if you put one driver in a Ferrari, the other driver is going to be annoyed. It's never going to work. And he said, oh, well, I'm not sure that's the case. We'll find a way around that sort of thing. And I said, well, believe me, it isn't going to work. And the most you can ever manage is one driver, as you did with Jackie. Do it very well. Or Michael, do it very well. But don't start doing a lot of other stuff, other drivers, because there'll be too much conflict of interest. And he said, well, what's your solution? I said, well, the solution is that the power in Formula One is with the teams. They are the entities with the cars. They are the entities that the drivers are attracted to because they have the cars and they can give the drivers an opportunity. And so what IMG should do is their own Formula One team. And if you do your own Formula One team and you have the ability to do it because you've got an incredible marketing network around the world of sponsors, you can get the finance, you can put a team together. And if you do that, you could then have your 20 or so drivers under contract because you've got the power. And not all of them would ever race for your team, but you would then be able to sell them onto other teams if they're very good. He said, oh, it sounds far too complicated. We're not in the business of running a race team. Get out of my office, basically. So that was that. And of course, I think I was 100% right. We're going back to, you know, whatever it was, 1980s then at that stage probably, 90s maybe. And I think I was 100% right. If IMG had done what I suggested they did and done their own Formula One team, then they would be an incredibly powerful Formula One entity right now. But of course they didn't do it because it was all too complicated. And that brings me to my point. The teams now are basically doing what I predicted they would all do. They're all basically, they're all aware that they have the power, they've got the cars, they've got the money, they've got the magnetism, and the drivers will flock around the teams. And around that, they can build up their own driver academies. What I never predicted was that teams would abuse that privilege by trying to make money out of it and charging drivers to be part of the academy. I never imagined that would happen because that's just not the way I think. But of course, that's what many of the teams do, and it's how they finance a lot of these driver academy things. If you've got the money, you can buy your son, providing he's got a reasonable CV, you can buy him into a driver academy at one of the Formula One teams. But in general now, it's starting to settle down, and you're seeing people like Toto Wolff doing exactly what I predicted 30 years ago would happen. They are the ones with the power. They effectively are the international management groups of today in Formula One. And if Toto wants to have 20 drivers under contract and mix and match and use this guy and help him get a drive somewhere else if he doesn't want him, so be it. And I think that's what he does really well. He's done a great job for Valtteri Bottas. Look, he's got him in the Cadillac now, for Pete's sake. And so it goes on. So, you know, yes, he might think, I would want Isaac Hadjar, but he's got the power to be able to make Kimi Antonelli pretty good, because he can run him in that car for the rest of Antonelli's career if he has to, till such point as he wins a race. And he'll be thinking, well, he's at least as good as Lance Stroll, for Pete's sake. And Stroll in a Newey car will probably get some podium finishes, may even win a race next year. So if we do a good enough job, Antonelli can win a race. I'm sure that's the way he thinks. What none of them have, of course, which the Windsor IMG team would have had, is the essence of the Rob Wilson approach to distinguishing one talent from another. And whereas most teams look at the money first and then the talent, I would always look at the talent, and I would do it through the perspective of a Rob Wilson. And I would always have guys like Hadjar in there, or Max, or anybody who's quite capable of creating a short corner, or Oscar Piastri. And there would be a priority all the time. But a lot of the teams don't do that. They base it a lot on who's got the biggest motorhome at this kart race meeting, because he's obviously got a wealthy dad, which is sad, but it's typical of current racing, isn't it? The Shadow Realm. Is Lewis Hamilton 25? Hunk or punk? Well, I don't know. I've never seen him as either, really. I just see him as a race driver. He's not doing very well as a race driver at the moment, but anyway, let's see what happens at Monza for him. It's a big deal, isn't it? He's having his first race at Monza anyway, in a red Ferrari. The crowd will love him, I think, and he will feel that he has to deliver. The problem for delivering is what? You know, he can only match himself against Charles, and delivering would be out-qualifying and out-racing Charles Leclerc around Monza. Maybe he will. Let's wait and see. It's a bit of a test, isn't it? As I said to Cameron, I can see him being as good as Charles through turn 1, 2. Charles probably better second chicane, probably better Lesmos. I think Ascari, there'll be not that much in it. Parabolica, Charles probably. You know, so Lewis has got to make up for quite a lot to do that. Tar Smoke, question 2. Do Ferrari actually want to win? They seem to be going the wrong in every direction. What is going on exactly? Well, this question could have come out of, 1973, when they were not going anywhere and they were suddenly deciding to get a car built in England with John Thompson, because they'd given up any hope of building a proper aluminium monocoque in Italy. Yeah, it's been going on for a long time, and then we have these good moments and we have the bad moments. Well, what went wrong exactly is they didn't hire Adrian Newey. Pretty simple. They hired Lewis Hamilton. And as I said at the time, and I don't think many people would have disagreed with me. Maybe they would, I don't know. But if you had the choice of either Lewis or Adrian as a way of turning around Ferrari and making them a much better team, you'd go for Adrian, because you want the car. And Carlos Sainz can easily win in an Adrian Newey Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton is only going to be as good as the car he drives. And if you don't have an Adrian and you've got a better plan for the engineering department, well then let's see it. So far, it's not very obvious, is it? So I think they made a massive mistake there. And you probably, John Alcon, I know he's a good guy, and I know he's the anointed, follow on from Agnelli. But then Agnelli never really got involved at that level of telling the team what driver to get and what engineer not to get. And he did. He's obviously big mates with Lewis, and they have the whole American thing in common. And he wanted Lewis in the car, and which to my astonishment, Freddie Vasseur went along with. And I just assumed he went along with it because he had a game plan, a master plan of how he was going to get Lewis back to where he was. But that doesn't seem to be obvious either, or evident. So I'm still waiting for an explanation from Ferrari as to why they didn't hire Adrian Newey. If Aston Martin, for all their faults, are capable of hiring him, how come Ferrari aren't? Michael Uvrad, Hi Peter, I heard your interview with Cameron where you were discussing luck. Do you think the current points gap correctly reflects how much better Oscar Piastri has driven this season? No, because the points gap reflects the retirement. The bulk of the gap is reflected by the retirement of Lando Norris. And I don't think that was a driver thing. Yeah, I'm sure there are some people at McLaren, maybe not on Lando's side of the garage, who were saying, you know, if he hadn't used so much curb or so much ripple strip here or there, it wouldn't have failed. He wouldn't have had the oil leak or whatever. But as I said, you know, race cars should be built to take. I didn't see any punishment that Lando gave that car that deserved to be rewarded with a retirement. So there was that. Other issues. I think, as I said before, I think where did I say this in the live stream? I think Oscar's done a better job when he isn't having a great weekend. In other words, he's going to have to finish second for whatever reason, which is always going to happen when there's two quick drivers in a very good car. In those weekends, Oscar's done a much better job of finishing a strong second, as distinct from Lando, who's usually had some sort of issue, poor start or this or that. When Oscar's going well, Lando doesn't do as good and as strong a job of finishing a very good second. And I think that's the difference, actually. Oscar's got a clearer, more solid baseline around which he operates mentally compared with Lando. That makes sense. Emu Warrior, good day from Melbourne. Yeah, good day, mate. Yeah, good. Lol, how come McLaren car looks completely normal? No crazy visible over-engineering whatsoever, like how Red Bull was when you saw the crazy lines when Perez used to crash, and yet they have the fastest car. Well, I'm glad you used Perez there and not Max. Yeah, we saw Perez doing quite a lot of strange stuff, but Perez has never been very good at driving with understeer. So even when the Red Bull was good, it definitely had understeer at some points if he misused it, particularly if Perez was trying to drive like Max, which he was for quite a lot of the time, and failing because he doesn't have the same feel for the front, which is why he looked pretty messy on occasions. But when a car is, I mean, all the cars look pretty stable, don't they? Let's face it. I mean, you hear Charles Leclerc moaning about the car and how terrible it looks, but yet when you follow him on board and you're following him from external cameras, it doesn't look that bad. You see the slight sort of movement of the rear, maybe on acceleration, but you don't see the car snapping around and doing all the things they used to do. They all look pretty good. They've all got very high levels of grip. They all brake incredibly late. They all have very good traction. They all have very good turn-in. It's just that some are much better than others, but you can't see it because by the time it gets to the race, most of the teams have got a balance for whatever grip level they're running. And so they're all going to look pretty neat and tidy. And that's why the McLarens always look good. You wouldn't set a McLaren up with understeer or oversteer. You just set it up to be well balanced. And by compromising, they're still way ahead of everybody else, which brings me back to my initial point of it's a disgrace how bad the aero efficiency is on all the nearest opposition to McLaren. You can understand it with Haas or you can understand it with Williams maybe, but for the top teams, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, not to have an aero package commensurate with that of McLaren, I think is a disgrace myself at this stage of this formula. Seleki. Hi Peter, do you think driver skills will have more influence on overall performance of races in 26 regulations? Love your analysis, thanks. I don't know really. I'm beginning to think, I'm fearing not, because they're throwing in new driver aids like push to pass and stupid active aero, and they've got a lot of electricity now they have to harness and all that stuff. So by the time you got rid of all that junk, how much left is there for the drivers actually to do with the steering and the throttle, actually driving the race car? Probably find they're in more lift and coast mode than they would normally have been in other eras, and there'll be other technical factors that'll come into play, and it'll be more and more of a robotic thing. I hope I'm completely wrong, but that's my sense of where we're going. It's all too contrived, and you may see lots of overtakes because of push to pass, and everyone will say the racing's brilliant, but in reality the racing's hopeless because it's totally artificial, and somebody who's doing a very good job with the steering, the throttle and the brakes actually isn't able to show it anymore. That's a good question, Lol. Why they deleted it. I think, yes, since no one knows how the engines would perform, there's a chance it would come down to drivers. Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't believe that this new category is designed to distinguish between the driving styles of Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson. I don't believe that's the case. I think this new category is all about 50% electrification and lots of artificial aids to try and make Formula One look incredibly exciting and fast in a straight line. Volts, I think most people will be blown away by the old engines. It was truly incredible. It's a deeply regrettable change. Well, it is. And you got to blame Jean Todt and Bernie a lot for that. As I said many times, Formula One should have had the brains to create its own Formula E, which runs within its own package, weekend package. That would have dealt with the whole business of the future in terms of energy. And the team should have been directly involved with that Formula E, creating the cars. The Formula One drivers should have done the odd race or two. Formula E as a separate entity should never have existed. And Formula One should have continued on the path in which it was very happy. V10 engines, lots of noise, relatively cheap, very reliable. But whenever it came down to new sponsors coming into the sport because they want to see where it's going with renewable energy and electric cars, they've got all that as part of their weekend race package. That's how it should have been done, but it wasn't, because Bernie and Todd fell out over Bahrain. When the Civil War was on there, Todd went off and did Formula E, and that basically then messed everything up, and Formula One went to hybrid engines in response, and that messed everything up. M.A. Khan says, M. Hughes on driving styles echoed what you said about Mansell having phenomenal sensitivity in short corner style. He said in that era cars were not equal in weight. Nigel had a weight penalty of 30 kilos against Prost. He believed Mansell was the quicker driver. Newey told Hughes Mansell would have beaten Prost easily in the 93 car. Yeah, well, the general wisdom at Williams in 93 was that Prost was anything but the professor and didn't really embrace the active car in the way Nigel had. And they were a bit disappointed by that, even though he won the championship. I wasn't around, so I can't really say anything other than what I heard from the team at the time, that Prost was a bit sort of nonplussed by all the buttons and the way the active thing worked, and he thought it was all a bit over the top and complicated, whereas Nigel was totally into it. So that's that second part. The first part, yeah, I mean, good to know Mark's a good bloke. Good to know that he sees that about Nigel, and he's absolutely right about the weight. Nigel made up for the weight disadvantage in other ways, muscle, strength, just generally being larger than life. That was part of his persona. And don't forget, in those days, of course, we could move, not the drivers, of course, but you could move the weight around. And so having a weight disadvantage was not just weight, it was also some ballast maybe they could move in the PK car, but not the Mansell car. So that was another reason why Nigel did so well, when you take all that into account too. But yeah, very strong guy. And Nigel, as I say, in 78, getting there in the end, 78, when I first met Nigel, he was super fit, and he'd go running in army boots. Forget the trainers, it was army boots. That's how he perceived hard slog running to be. And in his garage he'd have the old punch bag, and it would be that and karate, judo, he was, and golf, and rescuing ducks from the pond if they were in distress. He was everything. Great guy. Lancelot Jonathan, hey Peter, Max, former trainer, said Max spends a lot of hours driving the track on the sim before an official Grand Prix weekend. That's why he's always quickly up to speed. Yeah, I don't get me wrong. I've as I said before, when we talk about sims, they definitely have a major role to play in a number of ways. What they don't do is simulate the sort of forces that Max is managing and balancing when he's going into a corner like turn 9 in Zandvoort. But what they do is give Max a clear picture of of what the track's like. He's talking to the engineers about what compounds he's going to be on. Are there any changes with the curbs from one year to the next? Track surface, how it's evolved from one year to the next? All those things he can bring into play. And of course, like I think every driver does now, you'd be crazy not to use the sim for all of that. But if you try to take it to, if you're Liam Lawson and you're trying to work out where Hajar is quicker, forget it. It will not happen in the sim. That's my point. Okay, sorry, we've had that one. I don't want to put that up. It's not because it's a great comment from MMA Khan, which it is, but we've had it. I just came up by mistake. Lance, what do you think about this? Okay, well, that's that one. Dean Vincent, good evening from Australia. G'day, mate. Looking forward to the upcoming Ashes tour. It's only 3 matches, isn't it? Shame in a way. I mean, we got it's New Zealand over Christmas and Boxing Day, or New Year and Boxing Day, but the Ashes, the first 3, you just get into the whole Ashes thing, 3 matches, and then the Brits go home. What's that all about? Arvid Lindblad, what do we think about him? Well, yeah, good. You know, if I was in charge of the Red Bull driver program, I would probably have him on contract too. He looks very good. I'd have plenty of other guys who aren't, and maybe a few who are that aren't. A few, maybe wouldn't have a few who are. But Arvid is one I would have. And I think we don't know yet how good he is really. Who's better, Arvid or Dino Beganovic? Good question. Kitan Shaban, hope you're doing well. Yeah, thank you very much. Doing very well. Just about there with the voice, I think, as he has, having on the water. Monte Carlo Rally Cup. Nicola Losa. Hi, Peter. Thank you for showing your expertise as always. Could you please rank this trio, single-time World Drivers' Champion? Rosberg, Button, Raikkonen. Thank you. Rank according to what? He says, fudging it. I'd say Kimi. I think Kimi at his best, and I don't think he was at his best at Ferrari. I think he was at his best at McLaren, but he was sort of almost at his best at Ferrari. Kimi at McLaren was, in terms of technique, about as good as it gets. Front and rear of the car, softness of touch, short corners, traction, Perez-like traction. Very, very good. Jensen, Perez-like traction, very, very good. Foot coordination, never guilty of, time-wasting brake overlap. Always very precise. Not very good in crosswinds, flick oversteer. Understeer, not his greatest thing. Probably about the same as Mika Hakkinen when it came to handling understeer. Jensen and Mika about equally as confused by understeer, if that's the right word. Rosberg, yeah, very good. I mean, amazing car control. Brilliant that we saw Rosberg. Are we talking Nico or Keke here? Not clear. I'm talking Keke. It was great that we saw Keke in an era when he could drive cars like the 10B Honda around Silverstone at 160 miles an hour and driving on the back end of the car and just knowing it was there for him, those very stiff Patrick head rear uprights and drive shafts, and the whole thing was just Keke Rosberg stamp the cigarette out underfoot and get in the car. I think he had more of an issue at McLaren with the front. I mean, he was quick at McLaren, but when it went to understeer, it was difficult for him to be right there with Prost. He was much more of a sort of feel the rear of the car, great car control, very aggressive in traffic sort of driver, very consistent. A bit like Carlos Sainz today when Carlos was at Ferrari, really in a nice groove, getting the car to work well. Mexico, good example. And Keke, very good at driving cars that weren't the best, absolutely at their limit. He drove bad cars very well, in other words. And that was always a great thing. Good in the wet, very good in the wet. But of the 3, I would say the most classically pure was Kimi. If you're talking about Nico, I would put him very similar to Jensen. Probably better, more, yeah, very similar to Jensen actually, I think. Very similar. Slightly different. I mean, I don't think he was quite as lost as Jensen with crosswind, and possibly was able to use more tools and was a bit more deft maybe with the footwork when he had understeer. But I'm not sure he was as good as Jensen in terms of power application and accuracy in braking and things like that. So I think it was 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but very similar overall to Jensen. Right, a few more questions. Need to pag it in fairly soon because school's restarted. Got to go and get that sorted out fairly soon. We've got golf after school, plus Dexter, plus lots going on. Dexter long perambulation. Volts. I've always thought the vegan diet has hurt Hamilton's performance. It's rare top-level athletes do well on that. Well, interesting. I remember talking to Eddie Cheever once after because he was, this is before vegan was invented, he was a vegetarian. And it was South Africa, I think. I think he was driving for Renault at the time. He didn't have a very good race. And I went up to him and I said, Eddie, what happened? It didn't seem to go that well. He said, I ate pig before the race. I thought, wow. I think he means ham, but pig. I ate a pig. And I suppose that's the way vegetarians think about meat, isn't it? I don't know. Has it hurt Lewis? It doesn't seem to have hurt Djokovic, does it, being a vegan? His incredible stamina, fitness at his age, lack of injury. I mean, if you're looking at, is it good to be a vegan? You look at Djokovic, you think, yeah, answer's probably yes. So I don't know. I can't say any more than that. Nigel Mansell would say, for sure, that's the problem. He needs to go and eat a decent burger. So would Juan Pablo Montoya, preferably Burger King in Montoya's case, I would say. But I don't think that's Lewis's problem. I think Lewis's problem is that he didn't knuckle down over the winter and do 7 days with Rob Wilson, where Rob would have shown up his shortcomings that have crept into his driving, of not being able to break into a proper rotation point and manage the front while he's doing that. And Lewis would never have done that. I did suggest that to people close to him, and they said, yeah, right, he's really going to do that. But had he done that, I think he would be a better driver now, in my opinion. Donald McLachlan, crowd noise on Sky Sports Network only occurs at Silverstone, and it's electrifying. Can you put a word to the network to bring crowd noise all round? Can do, yeah. As I say, yeah. Monza, we should have lots of crowd, shouldn't we? After the race, particularly around the podium, especially if there's a Ferrari driver there. Imagine if a Ferrari driver wins. Imagine if Lewis wins, the crowd afterwards. Be good, wouldn't it? Monza's always good podium there, the way it overhangs the track. Yeah, the crowd, you should be able to hear the crowd everywhere. I mean, the engine's noise is not very big on the Formula One cars, so I'm surprised it's only Silverstone you can hear it. But Zandvoort, you couldn't hear it at Zandvoort? Well, probably. Okay. Teresa Pereira says, I remember 68 vividly. Good. Yeah, I think I do. I was there, Warwick Farm all year, watching not only the International 100, which Jimmy won, but also all of the national races that year. And it was a great year. Frank Matic in the SR3. I mean, can you believe this? Support race, Tasman race, Chris Amon, 330 P4 Ferrari Spider against Frank Matic, SR3. And that was the support race. Frank won it. Chris was brilliant, though, in that V12 Ferrari. And I think of the cars I actually saw out in Australia, how lucky I was, and the drivers too, and how close you could get to the drivers at Sydney Airport, carrying their briefcase. Tobacco says, Fernando isn't vegan, is he? I doubt it. I don't know. I've no idea, but I can't imagine he is. Spaniards generally tend to eat a lot of meat and fish, don't they? Right. What's all this one? Daniel Chalinor. He's talking to Volts. He won 3 world championships after going vegan. Should have been 4 in 2021 too. Then Red Bull era. Diet had no effect. Oh well, there you go. Yeah. Apex. Now we're talking about accents now. Some accents are fine, but there are some problem accents that you can't do. I think it's fairly obvious. So we can do Americans. Is that right? I don't know. I don't think it's obvious at all. Daniel Chalinor. The Mercedes and Zero Pod were rubbish. Even Max wouldn't have had a chance with that. That's right, that Zero Pod thing. But didn't McLaren have a Zero Pod as well on the Honda, the original Honda thing recently? Relatively, this time round Honda. I think they did. I think, isn't that what Ron called it? Zero. Oh, not Zero Pod, Zero engine cover, wasn't it? That's right. Yeah, zero pod. What were they thinking? What they were not thinking was we better give Peter Wright a ring and ask what he thinks about porpoising. We won't have porpoising. We're Mercedes. We're too good for that. Right, let's get on with some... 413 Tamaco Road, F1 Gamer, P1 with Matt and Tommy do watch-alongs, apparently legally. What makes them so special? Well, I think you'll find that if the powers that be actually watch that, which they probably don't, they would think it's illegal and they would take it down. But I don't think they watch it because they probably never heard of them. I would think. I may be wrong. I don't think they spend a lot of time surfing YouTube. The trouble is, as I say, it's not because I'm good or anything like that, but because I've been around a long time, my head is above the parapet. And they may say, oh, there's Windsor. What's Windsor doing there? What's that? Yeah, stop that. Who are these other blokes? Oh, we don't know them. I think it's a bit haphazard. It's a bit like that. And I just say, well, okay, whatever. Thomas Hazel, you can't stream the video of the race, but there's nothing to stop you broadcasting at the same time without the video. No, well, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's what a watch-along is. We're not doing the video. We're only doing the audio. And there is something. It's the fact that radio stations do pay quite a lot of money to Formula One to have the rights only for broadcasting, not video. So what then gives a YouTube channel the right to do broadcasting without paying any money? Can't say F1 would say, oh, no, you can do it. We just want 3 or 4 million, please. That's what they would say. I don't want to go down that path. That's all. I'll just do what I do. As much as I'd love to do some stuff like that, don't get me wrong, I would love to, but I'm not going to play with fire. We're lucky enough. I'm lucky enough to have YouTube anyway as a platform, and I just love everything about the way we can do what we're doing now. Recreate what used to be a TV station effectively and do all this stuff without having a director in your ear saying wind up now or this is boring or whatever. Just do whatever you want. I think it's brilliant. I don't want to abuse that, and I'm very, whatever it is, whatever's legal, I'll do it. Whatever's illegal, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I'll just do my thing. That's all you can do. It's like when you're on the road. If you're obeying the speed limit, somebody goes past going 30 miles an hour quicker. Do you say, oh, well, he's doing it, so why I'm going to get away with it, I'm going to do it? Well, when you get to the policeman, he doesn't care what the other guy's doing. He's only interested in what you're doing. Same thing in Formula One. So where are we going? So we're doing watch-alongs. That's all that discussion. Let's move on to something else. Technician, hi Peter. Do you find the Sky Formula One team commentary very Lando biased? Also, how do you think Zach is dealing with Lando potentially not being world champion? Cheers, mate. Well, I never listened to the Sky Formula One commentary, so I can't really comment on that. I'd be surprised if it was, because they're normally fairly down the middle, aren't they? I don't know. I really know. It's so long since I've listened to it, I can't really comment. How is Zach dealing with it? It's a good question. It's more how Lando's dealing with it, I think, will affect how Zach deals with it. And my impression is that Lando's dealing with it very well. And my estimation of his character and strength of character goes up, actually, virtually by the race. Where every race he doesn't win or something goes wrong. I'm not saying that as an excuse. I'm just saying when things aren't going well for him, he has a very, very strong persona of, I'm lucky to be a racing driver and we'll see what happens in the next race. And I think that's great. And I suspect that's how he is with Zach. I can't imagine he's thumping his fist saying this is not right. It was my team. I helped create this team and now you've got this guy in there stealing my championship. This is wrong. But I can't imagine Lando doing that. I can imagine plenty of other racing drivers doing that, but not Lando. And as I say, and I think that's a very good thing. And I think it's something that certainly I, as a human being, probably can learn from. It's accepting things for the way they are and just moving forward with a bit of a smile on your face if you can do it. That all sounds a little bit patronizing probably, but why not? Why not learn from people in these situations? And I think I was very impressed with Lando's demeanor after the Dutch Grand Prix. Because as I say, I know plenty of drivers who wouldn't have reacted that way. And in fairness to Oscar, I think he would be the same. I think he would be reacting in a very similar, controlled way. Now, my mate Cameron and the Formula One community may say, well, that's what makes McLaren so boring. I wish there was more fist bashing and cursing and swearing and all the rest of it. Then everyone would be more interested. But anyway, I'm not like that. I just quite like learning from other human beings. If they're doing things that I think, wow, I couldn't do that, that's impressive. I'm going to see if I can be like that in my own issues. And so, yeah. And I think Zach will feed off Lando's maturity in that respect. Deep down inside, I'm sure Zach would love it to come down to the last race and maybe Lando just get it, probably. Only because he's been with Lando for so long. But I don't think that's going to happen, is it? Apex twin Apex. So there's a nice double Apex right-hander, left-hander. Maybe the Red Bull and Racing Bulls should swap liveries. Only the geeks would realise. That's a good point. Yeah. 413 Tamako, has there ever been a definitive determination what caused Senna's crash at Williams? Was it badly welded repair on the steering wheel? It certainly wasn't the steering column. It was very difficult in terms of anything else on the car that might have failed for the Williams team to identify it, because the car was locked up basically in the back of a grandstand in Italy for 2 years or something, and by the time they got it, it was a waste of time. So not much could be learnt from it. But if you look at all the circumstances and all the build-up to the accident, it all points to tyre pressures and tyre temperatures and very stiff car, very low ride height, and bottoming out at the front, and the front wheels coming off the ground momentarily. And when they come down, he's on the marbles and just skates off to the right, and he's a passenger. Why was he going so quickly over those bumps at a restart with cold tyres and no tyre pressure? Because Michael Schumacher was behind him, and he didn't want Michael passing him going into Tosa in what he felt was an illegal Benetton, and he was determined to be in front and go through over those bumps flat. Bumps that he told Damon in the teammate car to be very, very careful of, even when the tyres were hot and high with pressure. So Ayrton did these things, and he took these risks, if you like. A bit like the Cadwell Park Formula 3 shunt he had when you go over a brow and it goes to the left, and he wanted to see if he could get flat over the brow, and he just went too quick for the car, basically. He got airborne, crashed straight into a marshal's post on the outside. Very lucky not to be injured. Rode off the car. But that was, Ayrton did those things, just absolute blind commitment to something that he wanted to do. I think he was also slightly offline as well, because Paul Henry has got a photograph of Ayrton leading the pack out of the chicane at the start of that flying lap, and you can see a piece of bright blue Benetton, a shard of carbon painted bright blue on the track, Benetton bodywork from the JJ Leto shunt at the start, which hasn't been cleaned off the track. And Ayrton, certainly from Paul Henry's perspective, you can see the little blue bit of bodywork. Whether from Ayrton's perspective you could see it, I don't know, but I'm assuming you could. And if he saw that bit of bright blue bodywork, he might have moved a little bit offline to avoid it, and then put himself even more in line with the bumps that then caused all the trouble. Of course, that bodywork should not have been there, because they should have, as I said earlier, they should have stopped the race after the shunt at the start, cleaned the track in a normal way, serviced all those injured in that start line shunt in the grandstand, and there were injuries, and then restarted the race when everything was set again. But they didn't. They just sent out a safety car, and that was the beginning of all the problems, really. Transporter 8. Good morning, Peter from Connecticut. Different question. Which driver do you think was the best at resetting themselves after a long holiday? We didn't really have long holidays until this August break thing. And since then, just look at it doesn't seem to affect anything, does it? I think having a decent racing car with good ground, good downforce, good balance, good grip is much more important than whether or not you've drunk too much beer or eaten too many hot dogs in your August break. So I think it's all down to the car still. And these guys are all pretty pretty fit, and they remain pretty fit even on holiday, I suspect. Shaq, dear Peter, is all hope lost for fans of Lewis? Will he ever be consistently as quick as Charles? Well, he's capable of it, for sure. He's capable of being as quick as Charles and being better than Charles on occasions. But he hasn't yet gone back to being the driver that he was in 21. He's still 80% the driver that he was in a bad Mercedes, trying to get the car to stop and living with porpoising and living with changes of grip level from corner to corner and trying to build up a stable platform with tire temperatures that worked to compensate for all of that. And the older he gets and the more frustrated he gets at the situation, the less likely he is, I think, to open the vault and look back at where he was in 21 and rebuild his style. I mean, in tennis or golf parlance, he basically needs to rebuild his golf swing or his tennis swing, which they've done over the years, various tennis players and golfers, very well to compensate for injury or racket upgrades or whatever it is. But in Lewis's case, because he's a racing driver, it's not considered to be fashionable or cool to admit that you've got to rebuild anything in your own style. It's always the car, or it's always the team, or it's this or that. It's never you. It's the way racing drivers are. And so I doubt it, to be honest. I think it'll just be more of the same. We'll see. As I keep saying, I think he's got a little bit nearer to where he used to be, and we saw that at Silverstone. Then Hungary was a mess. Then there was the August break. Zandvoort, he wasn't that far away from Charles, and now we go to Monza. If he's as good as Charles through the Lesmos and Parabolica at Monza, then we can all say, I think, that he's not far away from Charles and pretty near Charles, and he'll do pretty well relative to Charles from here on in. But if Charles does him in the normal way, on those corners specifically, then, you know, it's a problem. Max Flashheart. We all know what TV shows you used to watch, or probably still do. And speaking of Rowan Atkinson, great guy. Really lovely person, shy, humble, and very knowledgeable, I think, about motor racing. Nice person. McLaren runs on a British racing license. Red Bull had to change their racing license back to Austria for their anthem. Well, that's just replying to why we don't hear the New Zealand anthem when a McLaren wins a race, which is what we thought. Westerly Storm 99. Wow. Good morning from a wet Northern Ireland. Oh, well. What was your opinion and experience of interaction with Eddie Irvine? Not something I'd really want to remember fondly. Don't have many fond memories of Eddie Irvine. I found him quite rude and difficult and not that good anyway. Quite good at persuading people that when Michael was originally winning a lot of races at Ferrari, it was because Eddie with Michael had set the team up, and a lot of the credit should go to him. And I think a lot of people, there's possibly a little bit of truth in that. Not as much as a lot of people think. No, I think he was quite rude and annoying. And it's been a long time since I've told the story, but I'll tell the story of when I was working for, what was I working for? Fox Sport Net, I think it was. And I guess it was 98, maybe 99. Anyway, we're at Spa. And they've teed up an interview I'm doing with Eddie on the Thursday afternoon in the Ferrari awning by the motorhome. And it was just basically, you know, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And before the interview, the Ferrari guy came out and said, Eddie's going to be about 15 minutes late. Can you guys okay with that? I said, yeah, fine, no problem. Let's have a bit more coffee, please. And he said, can you do me a favor then? He said, when Eddie comes out, can you talk a little bit about the Goodyear tire testing he's been doing at Fiorano, because we've been simulating the wet track there, and we're trying to sort of do a nice job for Goodyear, so it'd be nice if you could talk a little bit about that. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Sounds quite interesting anyway. So anyway, Eddie comes out about 20 minutes late, sits down, and I start the interview. And I said, well, Eddie, let's just start about this week testing at Fiorano in the wet. It's been interesting doing tyre testing in dry conditions, but wet track simulation, how far away from reality would that sort of grip level be, do you think? And he looked at me and said, using the F word, I'm not effing talking about tyres, that's boring, and ripped off the mic and disappeared. That was my Eddie Irvine interview. So that's my memory of Eddie Irvine, really. I think he did have slightly sort of, shortish corners. He certainly wasn't a wide turn-in merchant oversteery, and he certainly didn't turn in as late as Rubens Barrichello. But he was, somewhere near Felipe Massa, I would say, in that. Not as good as Felipe overall, but had his moments when things were right. Incredibly, he didn't win the 99 World Championship, really, with Michael with the broken leg, and he still managed to blow it at Suzuka with that shunt he had. But then he would have been the first world champion in the history of the sport, I think, never to have had a pole. Isn't that right? I think that's the stat. And then, I still think Mika Salo was wrong to give that win to Eddie Irvine in Germany. And actually, on that matter, I couldn't help thinking about Hungary 2024 when Lando lost his P2. It seems a long time ago, doesn't it, that he's there leading a race and slows down to give the win to Oscar Piastri. And then you fast forward to Zandvoort. There's Oscar. Nothing to do with Oscar now, but then Lando loses his P2 and potentially the World Championship. I know they're different years and all the rest of it, but when you think about those two things in juxtaposition, long way apart, aren't they? Jez James, hi Peter. When Sterling said he's lost something to drive Formula One fast after his big shunt, maybe referring to the touch and feel and gift to see speed in slow motion. I spoke to Sterling a lot about that, and he thinks that he probably came back a little bit too soon, and had he waited another 6 months, he might have made the decision to continue. But it wasn't based on what you've said. It was all based on his concentration level. He felt, even when he drove that Lotus 19 at Goodwood after the accident, that he had lost nothing in terms of his peripheral vision, his balance, his feel for the car. But what he had lost was his ability to reproduce that over a 5-lap period of perfection with perfect concentration. And the concentration had gone. That's what he always said to me. And he feels that was because of the amount of time. Retrospectively, he felt that was the amount of time he'd spent unconscious in the hospital. And had he waited, as I say, another 6 months, he thinks that concentration level would have come back to where it was. But it was too late then. So there we go. Vita Health says, when did they say yes, Senna died. I would think that if a driver dies on track, the race is done. Okay, guys, let's race. Not quite sure what you're saying there, but I think the point is that Bernie, quite correctly, based on what had happened after the Von Trips accident at Monza and the Jochen Rindt accident in 70, when the police basically impounded everything, didn't want that to happen at Imola. And so he made sure that the record of Ayrton's passing was en route to the hospital or at the hospital, not at the track, which, to put it bluntly, was one of the jobs that Sid Watkins had to do. And so that's why the race continued, because they didn't want to acknowledge that he had passed. I still think it was wrong for the Williams team not to be told what had happened, because nobody knew at the time precisely what had caused the accident. And there was Damon restarting in an identical car, believing that Ayrton was fine, as all the mechanics did at the time. That's what they were told. Transporter 8. Peter, do you see this rumour of Colton Herta, I guess, Hurd moving to Formula 2? Everyone is saying it's a move that can possibly happen here in the States. Quite sure what you mean by that, but if he is, full credit to Colton Herta. I think he's very quick. And if the reason he's not taken seriously by Formula 1 teams is because he hasn't done enough road racing in the European style, good on him that he's doing F2. And I don't think it's a step down from IndyCar, which is what Tommaso Road says. I think if he's thinking Formula One, it's not a bad move to do Formula 2. Shouldn't have to. I still think that if Joseph Newgarden was offered the Cadillac Formula One drive now, he would probably take it. And I think he would do very well, just as an example, very well, because he'd have enough time to build up with the team, work on things. I mean, when I was trying to do that American Formula One team, I got Newgarden over with Connor Daly, both of them to do days with Rob Wilson, because I felt both of them would be capable of Formula One with us. And Rob said Newgarden was brilliant. Connor was too, Connor Daly, but he said Newgarden was very, very good. So, you know, why did Formula One not give him an opportunity? Ridiculous. We're going to have to go. There's another super chat here. Thank you very much from Andre Mogasan. Related to DRS, if they don't remove it, if they could at least give each driver X amount of uses per qualifying the race, 10 wherever they want on the track. Wherever they want on the track, I think, is the problem, isn't it? Because if Jack Doohan can have the shunt that he had at Suzuka, purely because of it was a bit of a mess with race engineers and who was going to drive that car, and he hadn't driven an FP1 and they told him it was flat, told him the entry was flat without DRS, and he has that shunt. And imagine what would happen if you could start putting the DRS in wherever you wanted or taking it out. That's my problem with the whole active DRS thing, really. X amount of uses. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, would that be better than the thing they have at the moment, when they're in the detection zone? They have to be within half a second, which is quite a long way usually from the activation zone. I don't know. My whole brain is a blur when it comes to DRS, because I just think the whole thing's ridiculous. So, Dejan Vukov. Hi there. Sorry, my mispronunciation. Hi, Peter. I've been watching your content for a while now. Huge fan. Mega job. Thank you very much. Transporter 8. Final question. I keep saying it, but there's lots of good questions. I know it's a lot of the same people, but they're all great questions. Hi, Peter. Another different question. United States is dropping all their regulations towards engines if the cars go back to a big V8 or something screaming louder. Do you think Formula One would follow suit? No, because they've got this thing about they've got to be the pinnacle of technology and looking towards, all the new hybrid era and even beyond that, full electrification. And there's a huge groundswell in Formula One and most of it's related to money and stock price, of being seen to be at that cutting edge. And that brings in a whole lot of new potential sponsors anyway. That's what they think. So, no, I don't think they'll follow suit. I think they'll continue to dig themselves into a hole, in other words. Dejan says, I'm traveling this weekend to Monza for the very first race. Any tips on how to maximize my stay there? Also, one technical question, what makes a corner great? Well, I would say go to the Fossati restaurant in Canonica to have some risotto formaggi. That's the first thing you got to do at Monza. Second thing is to go to the great little shops behind the paddock area and say hello to Mariangela and her mum, and have a look at all the amazing models and things they have there, artifacts. And then the third thing, Monza's not easy really, is it? If you can climb the old banking and look down on turn 1, that's not bad. If you can get out to the Lesmos, have fun there, outside of the Parabolica, maybe the best place to watch. It's not a great spectator circuit. I hate to say that. It's not. My best viewings at Monza have always been from the marshal's post on the inside of the Parabolica, where it's sort of a gantry over the track. And in the old days, you could go and, if you bought a San Pellegrino for the marshal, says, yeah, come up here, yeah, Peter, yeah. And I'd watch all the sessions from that lovely gantry as they're going underneath you into the Parabolica. Guess what you're not allowed to do today? So yeah, short of that, don't get too excited. Just enjoy all the peripheral stuff at Monza. There's another super chat here to end with Peter Hughes. Lewis must remember the old lines. Wouldn't he wonder about that and the Charles lines? Well, Well, it's a good point. But no, I don't think he does. I think, and if so, I don't think he necessarily feels he's doing anything differently anyway. I think he probably feels that he's doing exactly the same thing as Charles. And the telemetry probably proves it, which is where he's going wrong, because he's not. But it's very difficult, especially if he won 7 world championships, to say you're doing anything wrong, really. It would be his feel for the car. And how many times is he behind him anyway in practice? It doesn't matter in the race, because in the race, Charles is driving a different lap. He's driving the lap he needs to drive in order to try and do something about Hadjar or Antonelli or whatever he's thinking. He's driving a different lap. The only way Lewis would ever learn anything from Charles would be if they were absolutely on their own together and he was not focusing on his car, he was focusing on what Charles is doing. And the differences are so small and the speeds are so high. The difference in turn-in, even into turn 9, they're in 6th gear when they're approaching 9, and Charles would be turning in maybe, I don't know, that much earlier than Lewis. Would Lewis see that? I don't think he would. I mentioned once that I thought Oscar had learned a bit from following Max at Monaco. Slightly different at Monaco because the speeds are slower. And there are places where at slow speed you can really, shorten the corner. Tabac, good example. It's not that slow, but it's slowish. But in general, I don't think Lewis would learn anything following Charles like that. And if you want to, maybe I'll see some of you then. If not, I'll be back doing the normal videos, Friday, Saturday, Sunday from Monza. And looking forward to that very much. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to REC Watches, and of course to TrackNinja for their support of this channel. All great companies, all great products, all details in the description below this video. Please support them if you can. See you very soon.